Hola, buenos dias a todos. This day we'll be doing a book review, a literature that is part or came from Spain. This is entitled El Ignacio Hidalgo Don Quixote de la Mancha, or in English, Don Quixote. Now let's dive in and get to know more about it.
Hi, I am Andrea Saavedra and I am going to give a brief background about the author and the Don Quixote story itself. Don Quixote is a Spanish novel written by Miguel de Cervantes and it is originally entitled El Ingenioso Hidalgo Don Quixote de la Mancha. It is published in two parts. The first one is in 1605 and the second is 1650. According to New World Encyclopedia.org, Miguel de Cervantes Saavedra was a Spanish novelist, poet, and playwright, best known for his beloved Don Quixote. Widely considered to be the first modern novel, the greatest novel in the Spanish language, and one of the most influential and enduring works in the Western literature. That is why the language used in the story was early modern Spanish. According to the website newworldencyclopedia.org stated that Cervantes infuses the story of the befuddled Don Quixote and his imagined chivalric adventures with pathos, chaotic comedy, fast-paced action, and vigilantly realistic character portrayal, most notably of the mythical Don Quixote and his faithful, credulous companion, Sancho Panza. Cervantes employs astonishing postmodern devices in the context of 20th century fiction, blurring the narrative voice and obscuring the line between fiction and commentary. Above all, Cervantes infuses the novel with wisdom, insight into human psychology, and profound sympathy for humanity's flaws. Cervantes claims that he wrote Don Quixote to counteract the influence of those vain and empty books of chivalry, as well as to entertain his readers with merry, original, and occasionally prudent material. According to Britannica.com, Don Quixote is considered to be one of the most important books of all time, and it is often cited as the first modern novel. Don Quixote themes are truth and lies, literature realism and idealism, madness and sanity, intention and consequence, self-invention, class identity, and social change.
The summary of Don Quixote. Don Quixote is a middle-aged gentleman from the region of La Mancha in central Spain. He's so obsessed with reading books about knights. He decides to take up his lance and swords to defend the helpless and destroy the weak. So after a first failed adventure, he sets out on a second one with a somewhat cleverer named Sancho Panza, whom he has persuaded to accompany him as his faithful landlord. In return for Sancho's services, Don Quixote promises to make Sancho the wealthy governor of an isle. On his horse, Rocinante, a baron of Naguel, past his prime. Don Quixote rides the roads of Spain in search of glory and grand adventure. He gives food, shelter, and comfort, all in the name of a peasant woman, Dulcinea del Toboso, whom he envisions as a princess. On his second expedition, Don Quixote becomes more of a robber than a savior, stealing from and hurting frustrated and justifiably angry citizens while acting out against what he perceives as threat to his knighthood or to the world. Don Quixote abandons a boy, leaving him in the hands of an evil farmer simply because the farmer swears on an oath that he will not harm the boy. He steals a barber's basin that he believes to be the mythic Mambrino's helmet, and he becomes convinced of the healing powers of the balsam of fiebras, an elixir that makes him so ill that by comparison he later feels healed. Sancho stands Don Quixote, often bearing the brunt of the punishment that arises from Don Quixote's behavior. Don Quixote meets a duke and duchess who conspire to play tricks on him. Under the watch of the duke and duchess, Don Quixote and Sancho undertake several adventures. They set out on a flying wooden horse, hoping to slay a giant who has turned a princess and her lover into metal figurines and bearded the princess' female servants. During his stay with the duke, Sancho becomes governor of a fictitious isle. He rules for 10 days until he is wounded in an onslaught the duke and duchess sponsor for their entertainment. Sancho reasons that it is better to be happy laborer than a miserable governor. A young maid at the duchess' home falls in love with Don Quixote, but he remains a staunch worshipper of Dulcinea. Their never consummated affair amuses the court to no end. Finally, Don Quixote sets out again on his journey, but his demise quickly. Shortly after his arrival in Barcelona, the Knight of the White Moon, actually an old friend in disguise, vanquishes him. Cervantes relates the story of Don Quixote as a history, which he claims he has translated from a manuscript written by a Moor named Cide Hamete Benengeli. Cervantes becomes a party to his own fiction, even allowing Sancho Don Quixote to modify their own histories and comment negatively upon the false history published in their names. At the end, the beaten and battered Don Quixote swears all the chivalric truths he followed so fervently and dies from a fever. With his death, knights errant become extinct. Benengeli returns at the end of the novel to tell us that illustrating the demise of chivalry was his main purpose in writing the story of Don Quixote.
The conflict of this story does not only revolve in one scenario or in one aspect. Don Quixote is a lengthy literature for a reason. One conflict in Don Quixote is he is living his life thinking he is some sort of a chivalrous knight who is set in a quest to fight against monsters, free imprisoned individuals such as slaves, or for short term to bring or to represent justice to the world. Which is not. The battle against the monster are mostly a herd of sheep in reality, and one part of the most highlighted in the story is the battle of Don Quixote and Sancho Panza against the giants who in reality are just a giant windmill. This represents that Don Quixote is a man who is not sane. Now, as this battle or quest of Don Quixote occurring, he is pestering or disturbing the livelihood of individuals who are working. One scenario of this is when Don Quixote and Sancho enters an inn when Don Quixote thinks it is a castle. When he saw a maiden who he thinks is a princess, he starts to initiate intimacy or to make love with the maiden. The maiden screams, thus alarming the men in the inn and kicking them out both. So we can observe that there is a person versus himself and a person versus society conflict in this literature. Another thing that I have observed in this literature is that how repetitive the scenarios are. One example of those is when Don Quixote and Sancho enter an inn, they are both kicked out because Don Quixote thinks that they are in a castle with a princess, so the ending always both of them getting kicked out. So I think that is why the literature consists of 928 pages and are in 2 volumes. So through reading this Don Quixote, I can picture the life way back then in Spanish. I have also observed the cultural representation of the Spanish era during this time when Don Quixote was written and published. So, as I said earlier, Don Quixote is a lengthy literature. We have faced different characters, but some of them has a similar trait, but there also has a different traits which makes them unique. So, to start describing their characterization, let's start with the protagonist. Let's start with Don Quixote. As we read the literature, he is a madman who, after reading a tons of night fictional story, he started visualizing himself and tries to revive in the world a knight who possesses a chivalric virtues. Throughout the story, I can say that he is dedicated, honest, and dignified, idealistic, even though he is a man who is with not a sane mind. Well, I cannot conclude that Don Quixote is a very well gentleman because, as I said earlier, there are scenes or parts where he approaches maidens and made them uncomfortable. But there are also chapters where I pity him and his partner Sancho because they always end up being physically beaten up or exhausted, but still they continue or pursue their quests or journeys. Next character is Sancho Panza, a peasant laborer, the person whom we can consider as the companion of Don Quixote. Well, the reason he follows Don Quixote in his bizarre adventures because he was promised an island to govern with by Don Quixote. Throughout the stories and with different insight, he is a greedy but kind of a person, faithful but coward. Same with Don Quixote, I also pity him due to the fact that he is also end up getting mobbed up by different commoners and tries to cover up and explaining things to Don Quixote, which is a person with not a sane mind. Next is Rocinante and Dapple. Rocinante is the horse that Don Quixote rides with, and Dapple is a donkey that Sancho Panza rides with. I consider them as faithful because they've been with them throughout the journey, even though I'm curious about Dapple for his disappearance and but also reappearing in some different chapters. Next is the barber and the priest. I consider them as a vital characters because they are a good companions of Don Quixote where they are persistent on curing him and putting an end to his madness. Now, there are also side characters such as Cardenio, Lucinda, and Ferdinand whose story are involved with being a love triangle. Well, my insight for this is that their story of being in a love triangle are an add-ons on this story of Don Quixote, to represent more about Spain, to spice up the story. Their side of stories display how Miguel de Cervantes, the author, see the people of Spain during those years. Through these different characters such as the wife of Sancho Panza, who is an ambition and a loving wife, displays more the characteristics of the main characters of this story. Reading Don Quixote, you can observe that the themes are more likely onto idealism and madness, truth and lies, and love and heroism. We can observe on the book how Don Quixote is described to be an imaginary battle and confronting different scenarios that there are far from reality, such as battling, and due to this, Don Quixote is described as crazy. After reading and researching about Don Quixote, I realized how ironic this literature is. A madman who tries to be a chivalrous knight and represent justice to the Spain or to the world, and how in the end he faced the reality that all the things that he faced, such as fighting giants, aren't real, and how he's sorry to the people who he disturbed with. Don Quixote shows us how powerful our imagination is, on how we can make things change on our own and for also the others. This brings me that how we should also give importance to the mental health for the people of today, and how to be understanding and help people in need, just like what the priest and barber did for Don Quixote.
Don Quixote is one of the most famous of all novels, and with good reason. I'm Ivany Irene B. Abayon, My role is to let you know how the story ends. Cervantes himself states that he wrote Don Quixote in order to undermine the influence of those vain and empty books of chivalry, as well as to provide some merry, original, and sometimes prudent material for his readers' entertainment. Whether or not the author truly believed the superficiality of his own purpose is immaterial. In fact, Cervantes did make a complete end to further publications of chivalric romances. Despite the harmful extravagances of these novels, this form of writing has one advantage over more truthful literary forms. Cervantes writes in the latter section of Part 1 for chivalry offers a wide and spacious meadow through which the pen may run without any hindrance. Perhaps Don Quixote owes his genesis to this notion of his author. But as Cervantes launches his idealistic and possessed hero on a career open to public contempt, the possibilities of a many-leveled kaleidoscopic theme must have become apparent very early in essence. Don Quixote shows us that the reality of existence consists in receiving all the impact of experience which transformed to the medium of special awareness is synthesized as part of the character. Cervantes ends the tale of Don Quixote, Part 1. At the end of this book, Cervantes makes it very clear that he has killed off Don Quixote and that the guy will never ever return. In other words, he's telling any would-be fictional enthusiast to vast up. He also tries to make it clear that he is the first and only author who ever wrote a legitimate story about Don Quixote. No doubt about it, Cervantes is very possessive when it comes to his famous character, and he wants to make sure that no one ever writes a word about this character again. It's fun to speculate on how he would have ended the book if he didn't have so much spite of the author who knocked him off. Then again, maybe there wouldn't be a part 2 at all without the poor guy. In the end, the beaten and battered Don Quixote forswear all the chivalric truths he followed so fervently and dies from a fever. With his death, knights errant become extinct. Benengali returns at the end of the novel to tell us that illustrating the demise of chivalry was his main purpose in writing the history of Don Quixote.